out of them to be able to propagate whatever we are doing. And until recently, that's when we got into partnership with the Media Council to start now training persons with disability in journalism. So it means that as an organization or as HR people here, sometimes there is this paradox whereby persons with disabilities are going to school and they are not able to get employment. At the same time, employers are looking for persons with disabilities, but they cannot find them. So we are looking at where is this mismatch that we are doing? And this goes all the way, because if at the policy level, employers were obligated to get persons with disabilities, irrespective of their talents, I believe that someone could be, there are people whom I know that have been teachers, but end up in journalism, or people who've been engineers in one area, but I find that the person is actually doing marketing. So based on that, if an organization purposes to reach out to that and they undertake to do that as one of their driving mission, then you'll find that we are able to achieve inclusion in the workplace. I will be continuing to share as we go ahead, but I think that it's upon probably the HR team that is here on this particular discussion to cascade this issue and take it at the level whereby the board is also involved in this matter and the policies are done. Once policies are done, the budgeting will be done and inclusion will be a reality. It will not be something where I normally say that let it not be the business of the continuity of a problem. Let's have this business whereby we are having these issues being solved once and for all, and we move forward as a society. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for the insights. Like the
make
fact
a
that
difference in the kind of skills that we are bringing that we are advancing in this country. If we realize any gap, then we can partner with the right people to make sure that what we are looking for at the workplace, we are able to get or to build. Thanks for that. At this point, I'd like to bring in Simon. Simon from Site Savers and the extensive experience he has had in this space. And Simon, I'd like you to just address the question around really the key factors that employers and companies need to put in place while employing persons with disability. What have you picked from your experience, and what is it that matters in getting these people in, and not just getting them in, but making sure that they grow while working and even become more than they are today? Simon?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. A lot of what I'll say, I think, reinforces what Paul has been saying, what Luke has been saying, what others have been saying. That my experience, we're very lucky in this sister program to I2I called Inclusion Works, which operates in Kenya, but also in Uganda and Nigeria and Bangladesh. That our learning from the programs over the last 2 years is that in general, employers want to employ people with disabilities. That's unquestionable. Yeah, and I think perhaps that's something surprising to the disability movement, who have been very much kind of used to banging on the door. It's you've got to employ people. Companies want to employ persons with disabilities. It's unquestionable, and we see that most obviously in Kenya. Kenya has a clear leadership role globally on disability. It's not a surprise what's come out from the co-hosting of the Global Disability Summit. And we see that how that's reflected in companies, of course, like Safaricom, and the coordination then of the forum around the Disability Summit. But also, as we saw in that video from Standard Chartered Bank right at the beginning of this webinar, of this discussion, that there is that energy and that enthusiasm and that call for all companies in the private sector, the public sector, and in the development sector to be more inclusive. The challenge is around confidence, and this is what we found across all 4 countries. And employers saying, look, we're trying, in general, we're trying to be inclusive, but we're struggling. And we need support. And I think this then changes the paradigm and reinforces a lot what Luke has said in his presentation, in his answer. Yeah, that companies need to be more confident around disability, have the fundamentals. It's not just around physical accessibility, it's around policies, which has been raised already. It's about the culture, the unconscious biases, the reporting, the public reporting of inclusion, which I think fundamentally shifts the game. But it's also about how we work with persons with disabilities on having employment readiness and self-confidence. Yeah, again, we saw in that Standard Chartered Bank video, the job seekers who were thinking that a bank environment was not for them. They've been told since their childhood that their aspirations should not be around formal employment of working in large companies. It should be more the income generation kinds of activities of dressmaking or shoemaking. These kinds of trades. So it's building that self-confidence and that employment readiness. And then as Luke said, acting as a bridge between the two, bringing the two together. There is unquestionably an energy for companies to become more disability confident and more inclusive. There's clearly an expectation around young people with disabilities in particular now to aspire to these formal employment jobs. And it's just building confidence in the system. And thankfully, that's what we're charged to be doing alongside ending in Kenya, I think are making huge gains. Yeah, the work we did with Paul's team recently in having conversations with 390 line managers and having the line managers define what is it we need to do next as a company, not only to recruit, but also to see career progression and to see people in leadership roles. The work that we did with Paul in launching a whole set of resources around disability confidence for employers. And of course, the work from other companies like East Africa Breweries Limited, who are making commitments, those public commitments around inclusion, not only in the core of the company, but along their whole supply chain and distribution chains. And we see that also with Margaret's organization, Coca-Cola Beverages Africa, wanting to be far more inclusive. So I think it's it's a moment in time in Kenya where there's that huge energy, and it's now a case of us all working together to build that confidence in the system, and then we will see remarkable breakthroughs in the next few years.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. What I like about
brief presentation, you've mentioned confidence more than 5 times. And that just shows how much you believe in it. It's about building confidence with the employers, with the persons with disabilities themselves, even to be able to get out of the house and go look for a job and show up when that opportunity arises. And also to build confidence in the system that we have that connects the two and that makes it possible for the job seeker to get a job and for the employer to take in this person and to grow them over time. So confidence is the word. Thank you very much, Simon. I like that. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Margaret from Coca-Cola. Margaret, you're there? So thank you. So I'd like you to help us address, and you've had Simon has just quoted, Coca-Cola for some of the great things they are doing around this particular agenda. I would like you to speak to the issue of the practical things that you've done at Coca-Cola to eliminate any racial, ethnic disability, or issues of harassment or issues of discrimination in the course of work. What are the practical things that you've done to enforce these practices that we are saying are necessary for this kind of agenda to thrive? Margaret?
Thank you so much.
Margaret?
Thank you so much. So some of the things that as Coca-Cola Beverages Africa, we've been able to do just to eradicate the stigma. For example, we partnered with Site Savers International, and they were able to facilitate for us unconscious bias training and disability inclusion training. That way, you're able to create awareness and you are able to ensure that they accommodate, as we onboard persons with disabilities, they are accommodated at the workplace. We also have inclusive policies. So having policies such as harassment policy, ensuring that you have put discrimination policy also, and complaint process. In the event an employee feels probably they are facing some types of discrimination, there's a process for them to be able to, raise the concern and it will be addressed.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to add something to that, I would like to invite our colleague from Plan International, because she said she does quite a lot of work.
And even when it comes to workplace violence and harassment and discrimination. Number one, we should know that a person living with disability faces multiple layers of discrimination. On number one, on the fact that they are disabled, and on another level because of the different other factors that may really be affecting them. These other factors could be race, ethnicity, their financial status, their education background, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to gender, especially when we're talking about gender and violence and harassment at the workplace, we must realize that number one, gender is one of the main factor that actually predisposes a person to be an easy target of violence. So we find that a woman with disability will be more likely to be affected when it comes to harassment and violence and discrimination, sometimes more than a man with disability. And there are many other factors. We know that stigma and discrimination also affect the way persons with disability are treated at the workplace and even in the society. So, and this, when persons with disability really face out of stigma and discrimination, it socially excludes them. And the social exclusion itself makes them go away from mechanisms and support systems that can actually really be there to protect them. So I think when it comes to gender and disability, there is quite a very big interconnection that gender will mostly make a person with disability to be in a much worse situation. And in this case, we are talking about women and girls with disabilities. So we also have the perceptions of people, how people view disability, and this really affects their outcomes and their opportunities that they're able to get out there in the society. Thank you. Okay, number one is to recognize that when we are talking having a woman with disability, you should be able to recognize that this woman is disproportionately affected by violence and by any other issue of discrimination that may arise. So you need to be very careful as the HR manager to have that at the back, or the HR staff to have that at the back of your mind that yes, this is a woman with disability, this is a person with disability. Yes, we should treat them as equally as everyone else, but there are other factors that really make them very vulnerable to discrimination, very vulnerable to abuse. And in our policies, as I said again, we should make sure that our policies clearly are stipulating what we call and what we mean when we say we are talking about inclusion, what we mean when we talk about harassment and discrimination, what are the proper mechanisms that should be there to address any issue of discrimination or harassment at whatever given point. And number three, to also be very open, to foster a culture of openness, whereby if a staff has an issue and they know they are facing challenges, that they are able to really to come out there and speak out about their issue. And also when it comes to diversity in the workplace, even at the leadership position, the company, I only say that you will know how diverse and inclusive a company is or an organization is from the leadership that is there or the executive that is there. So if you find that in a particular company, all the executive or the leadership is just basically men or women, then you find that there is an issue of inclusion and diversity. So it really needs to come out from the top, that the leadership and the management foster an inclusion platform. And then from there, they can be able to roll that down up to all the other staff and make sure that inclusion and diversity is really at the core of the organization. There are so many things that companies should do, but basically is to make sure that we have policies that are really speaking towards any form of harassment, any form of discrimination on the basis of race, gender, and any other factor that may actually exclude a person or deny a person an opportunity because of these other factors.
Okay, so basically, pick that integration of our policies is key as we look at policies around gender, disability, and all that. There's a way we can integrate our policies to make sure that we are promoting an all-inclusive agenda. So we are almost getting to the end of this session. So I'll start just by asking Lois to just help us understand if, and many times HR professionals sometimes don't know if we are in a space where we have persons with disability, what should we do to be able to give you all the accommodation that you need in a workplace? Do you have a role as a person with disability, or should we be the ones reaching out? What do you advise?
Reaching out, what do you advise?
Thank you so much for that good question again. There's a slogan that we like to use, nothing for us without us. So it's really very impossible for you to adjust an environment whereby you do not know who you are adjusting it for. So the best thing is actually for us who are here, the HRs from our different organizations, whenever we are designing, whether it's policy, whether it's the environment, the best way to do it is to involve the persons with disabilities, because these are the consumers of these, these policies or this environment. So I'll give an example of my workplace. So whenever I identify a gap, I usually consult with the HR and tell them, there's a gap here, so how are we going to address this? And if, sometimes, not like we know, no man is an island, so like we don't have the knowledge of everything. And, we always need to consult on the right people. As a person with disability myself, I may not have the know-how of everything too, so I usually consult. And one thing, the best thing to do as well, like for my case, I am in the D&I Council. We have a Diversity and Inclusion Council, which I'm also part of that. And one of the pillars that my company has in D&I is disability. And so there is no way that a person who probably has no disability or is not a caregiver or a parent of a person with disability can actually articulate very well, very clearly exactly what accommodation is required for PWDs. And one thing that I would really like to say, there was another forum I was, and someone talked of employees with disabilities being favored. And it's funny because he actually mentioned Safaricom, and it was about the targets of PWDs at workplace. So one thing I really want to put it clear is that when we provide reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities, it doesn't mean that we are favoring them or they are being favored, or we are, giving them lower targets than any other person. It's only that they need that reasonable accommodation. And it's not a favor, it's what they need for them to be productive. It's what we need so that we can actually be able to work and bring our whole selves to work every day. When I wake up in the morning and I think of going to my workplace, I'm very comfortable and confident.
Very elaborate need to involve the persons with disabilities. Thank you. So in brief, then I'd like to request my colleague Violet to just mention about just 2 key barriers that you think employers need to eliminate in getting persons with disabilities at the workplace.
Is at the work.
Okay, during the employment or after employment?
When getting, before.
Before. Okay, first of all, I would say that it is good that if you are invited for interview and you are a person with disability, it is good to explain the special needs or special adjustment you will want to be made before you reach. When I was at the University of Nairobi, a friend of mine came. She wanted to do journalism. And journalism office is at education building, 4th floor, there is no lift. So a guard offered to pick for her the form, and she got annoyed and she went. So it was unfortunate that this is a government institution that did not consider this. I used to climb up, but I have to rest twice. So I have to go early enough. But what I'm saying, Suppose she was going for an interview and you explained before, then they will be able to transfer the interview to another room where it's accessible to you. Another thing, when we attended interview at Safaricom, JCC, we were treated according to our special needs. However, I felt pain because one of us who was visually impaired was told that she cannot be interviewed because they didn't prepare for brace. I saw her going home and it was that bad. So if you communicate the things you will need before, it will help the employers to prepare. And another thing I wanted to say, previous speakers spoke of ability, confidence, which is very important. Maybe employers should also try much to build, to focus on your ability, not seeing your disability. Let me share this. It happened to me when I was still naive, direct from college, and I did not know my rights as a person with disability. A friend told me of an advert on one of the FM stations. I applied and they shortlisted me because of my qualifications. When I went for interview, there was a lift, 19th floor. So I got my colleagues, they were already employed and they were very happy to work with me. So as I sat, a lady came. So when she came, I stood up and she was really disappointed. That is when she noticed disability. So she forgot about my qualification. She focused on my disability. And I could see frustration in her eyes and I was unable to help. So she left, she told me, kindly wait. So when she went back, she was talking to her colleagues and where they were was half wall glass. Then she was telling my shit. And she said, oh, really? So what are we going to do? Then she said, I don't know. They say, oh, tell so and so. So I was almost shedding. They didn't get back up to date. So when I hear people talking of discrimination, the wearer of the shoes knows where it pinches. If it happens to you, you can believe what I felt. But this was direct discrimination. If at all it was today, then I could have known where to report because this is discrimination that I can give evidence. I didn't communicate my disability before, but it was good because suppose I communicated, they could have not even invited me for interview in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. What I pick from you is the need to get the clarity on needs. Even when we are inviting people for interviews, it's okay to ask, do you require some form of, accommodation? Is there, could you be having a disability? Is there anything that we need to do to accommodate you to be able to attend to that particular interview, to focus on people's abilities, and basically to eliminate discrimination, not just to have it in our policies on paper, but actually to practice it. So thank you very much for that. Margaret, what would you say as a talent specialist to persons who are looking, persons with disabilities who are looking for a job, just in brief? Is there any encouragement you'd like to give them?
Yes, I was fortunate last week to attend the National Council of Persons with Disabilities Career Portal launch. So it is something I would encourage persons with disabilities to be able to create their profiles there. And I also understand the portal is able to train the employees and make them to be equipped with various skills. So that way we are able to bridge the gap between what the job market requires and what the individual has. So registering your profile at the portal and also taking up the courses just to ensure we bridge the skills gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a lot we could have discussed, but time is not on our side. So at this point, I'd like to invite Paul Kasimo once again, and this will be the last one. And it's just for him to paint to us the value, because at the end of the day, many times businesses look at it from a value perspective. Sometimes people will say from the bottom line, But in terms of people, what value do we get by having these persons with disability in our workplaces? What's a case for business, Paul?
I think the case for business is first, it's not just the right thing to do for business. It is a human rights item. And I think organizations that have purpose will find it very easy to connect that to say, the reason we exist is not just to make money, but also to transform lives, to inspire possibilities in others. I think that's the first piece. But I think the other piece is where you change your mindset from this is a cost to actually diversity grows an organization, whether it is diversity from gender, whether it's diversity from people with disability, whether it's diversity from thinking styles. I think that is a best thing to do. Yes. What I will also ask organizations to do is if they can sign up to small bits, it doesn't have to be a big one. So the business case is where you can say, actually, start with just stating an intent and ensure that you're inclusive. If your customers, you expect your customers to be diverse, how can you leave a core part of the population in the pursuit of money? I think that's the piece that I would say. And then just partner with others and you find it becomes easier to walk the journey and be part of a bigger force for good for organizations. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
To close that discussion at, and we'll keep these conversations going, and we'll be able to share with you, even before we close, some of the resources that are available to take this agenda forward. So we will close the panel discussion session, and at this point then I would like to move to the next session of our program, and just to invite back Simon Brown will take us through some essential checklists, for disability confident employers. Simon, welcome back.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to try and share my screen if possible. Yes, let me share that. Yeah. So great. And building on from Paul. In this short presentation for a few minutes, there's clearly a call for resources to support companies, employers in being more confident around disability. And we've spent quite a lot of time over the last 6 months developing some of these resources into a toolkit, which we recently launched with the ILO Global Business and Disability Network in November. As I say, building a little bit on Paul, the whole of these resources are based around the business and ethical rationale or reason to becoming more confident on disability. Yeah, as Paul said, the most diverse companies attract the best people because they know they are much more highly productive and innovative and reflect then the customers, the consumers of the company, and deliver outstanding innovation and customer relationships, which build the reputation of the company, which in turn attracts the best people. Now, for a long time, of course, all around the world, there's been an absence of people with disability in the workforce, and companies are recognizing that both as a human rights perspective, but also as a business and ethical reasoning. And so we spent a lot of time thinking that through and then developing this framework of the fundamentals of disability confidence, and going from leadership, building the leadership capacities to drive this throughout the organization, of liberating the potential of technologies, of course the environment, the physical built environment of the company, but also looking at things around becoming an exemplary employer, of investing in citizenship and recognizing the relationship between diversity and inclusion, but also the social responsibility of a company and how the two interact into what's called business sustainability. And the foundation of that is always learning directly from people with disability. So we've taken this framework and then developed this toolkit, which is freely available, and I'll share the link to it in a moment at the end of this presentation. But looking at things then around the legal briefings for Kenya and other countries, the basic accessibility auditing standards and how to audit the built environment, of guide to accessible communications in terms of documents, websites, videos, these kinds of things. And as you see on the screen, then lots of others are in terms of interviewing candidates with disabilities, building inclusion into social responsibility programming. Yeah, and I'll go through a few of these resources on some slides and then share the link with you. So the legal briefing, we've created these for Kenya and, as I say, also other countries to give the basic legal responsibilities of employers under the really well-developed legal framework of Kenya. And I think this is again a reflection of how advanced Kenya is and how much of a leadership role Kenya plays on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in employment, yeah, and how the discrimination is really clearly set out within the law. The accessibility standards. This guide, I think we've tested this recently with East Africa Breweries Limited in their main offices, their new main offices in Nairobi, but also the Nairobi brewery and the malting mill, and looking at then the full kind of range of physical accessibility needs, yeah, from the access to the building, from outside of the building to inside, the reception, the meeting rooms, the general working spaces, the restrooms and the showers, lifts, and all the way down to things like how to escape routes, yeah, and thinking these things through. It's a very, very comprehensive accessibility standard, which we can support companies, and as I say, we've piloted that with East Africa Breweries Limited recently, and are very open to share this and work with other companies on this. A basic guide to communications, as I said, looking at how you communicate. Yeah, that one of the barriers for people with disability, of course, is access to information. And it's not that the information isn't there, but it's just inaccessible. So how you make your documents, your websites, your advertising really accessible, and looking at then the specific needs of different, what we call impairment groups. Interviewing candidates. This came up already, yeah, from one of the presenters, of different impairment groups, of course, have very, very specific needs in terms of interviewing, how you need to think these through. I remember a conversation I had with Univa in Bangladesh, where a very senior manager to interview somebody with a disability, because I've never had that experience before. So it's looking at then all of these different kinds of disabilities, the impairment groups, and giving some guidance on what we need to think through in terms of those specific needs, but also looking at things like respectful communications and the words that we use to talk about disability, and recognizing that there are words that perhaps were relevant or acceptable when people like me were much younger, but are no longer really respectful, yeah, and helping then everybody adopt a more modern, a more relevant way of talking about disabilities, which is often a big hurdle for employers, of not knowing the words to use. And I think this is a great way to support managers in being able to talk about disability, but also to talk to people with disabilities. Another example here, investing in human potential, and recognizing, as Luke has said and others have said, that it's not just about the employer, it's also about the job seeker, and recognizing that we have to invest our time in supporting job seekers with disabilities in being employment ready, which can mean job fairs, career fairs, or structured work experiences, of giving people a chance to have an experience within a company, yeah, just part-time work experience, or mentoring. This is an area which we found incredibly powerful in Site Savers and the Inclusion Works program of HR professionals, practitioners, giving 2 or 3 hours per month to mentor 1 or 2 job seekers, and the incredible results. We piloted this in Nigeria, and we're just now replicating that with the Institute of Human Resource Management in Kenya. The results were incredible and are incredible. Half of the job seekers then found the job that they were looking for or the internship that they were aspiring to, simply by HR professionals mentoring them, building that confidence, reviewing their job applications, and investing our social responsibility budgets also in the development of talent. And finally, in the examples, and this is just an example, a few examples of the guides that are there. Really recognizing that the best way to learn with disabilities, students that are currently out there looking for jobs, and that we will have people with disabilities in our company, and learning from them on how we need to adapt the physical environment, the policies, the culture of the organization to be far more accessible. Yeah, so there's this whole range of documents, of guides, which you can access on the website that's on the screen there, simply by going to inclusivefuse.org / load all these resources for free. Relationship with the disability organizations, because we all, in the end, we all want the same thing. Yeah, so I'll stop there, and please do go to the website and do download the toolkit, because I think you'll find it incredibly helpful in building that disability confidence in employers. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Simon. And really, I think this gives us the where to start, because many companies and many HR professionals have sometimes said that, yes, they want to do it, but they did not know what to do or where to start. So it is fantastic that we have now resources that are available that they can leverage on to give them the how, to give them the guidelines on what to do in which kind of a situation. So that is really appreciated, and I'm sure HR professionals who are logged in will find that quite useful, and a number of them might actually reach out. And just to advance that conversation then, I would like to invite my colleague Mary Nyaga, who leads a program that we have here at FKE called the Female Future Women Leadership Program. And she just take us through really the other resources. What other resources do we have in advancing these agendas? So that if you're there as a HR professional and they just do not know where to get what kind of help, you will exactly know who to call upon or where to reach out for what kind of information. So Mary, karibu sana.
Thank you, Grace. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues, and welcome once again to this program. As Grace has introduced me, my name is Mary Nyaga, and I'm in charge of the leadership program, Female Future. And I think to start with, it's like one of the slides presented that let's stop discrimination, and we can do this through the information that we have. At the start, we also had statistics on the recent data from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics on disability. And some of them were, the resources we listened to this morning were Persons with Disabilities Act of 2003. Before I start my presentation, there's also resources from your organization, some of the things that your organizations have done that can also be shared among our membership. There's also the Persons with Disabilities Act of 2019 on tax deductions. and of course deductions. And of course, one of our programs that we run at the Federation of Kenya Employers, the Employer of the Year Award, with a thematic area on the face of Africa in regard to inclusivity and diversity. So as I start my presentation on some of the things or some of the available resources from the Kenya Business Disability Network, we have a catalog of resources available to members just to build your capacity and confidence in the disability, in disability inclusion, which we've all heard about. One of the things that stood out actually was confidence, even with the information to do the right thing. So some of the principles that the Federation of Kenya Employers and Kenya Business Disability Network has is the 10 principles that actually define the work on disability inclusion. So these principles are basically about respect and promotion of rights, of people's rights. There's also the non-discrimination, the equality of treatment and opportunities available, accessibility in regard to digital and physical environment, job retention, confidentiality comes up again, attention to all types of disability, collaboration, evaluation, and knowledge sharing. So there is more of the principles on the business and disability on the website or this link. Next slide, please. So FKE and the ILO resources on disability inclusion include FKE provides KBDN, where employers can learn and share best practices and create links with associates for further support. So this is also calling some of the members we've heard of today in regard to telling us some of the things that they've been able to do at their workplaces. Then also FKE provides through the platform of KBDN, the Kenya Business Disability Network, a platform for business-to-business linkages and networking in diversity and inclusion. We also have the annual Employer of the Year Awards that also recognizes leaders in innovative, inclusive, and sustainable business. And the ILO Global Business and Disability Network has a free mentorship course and has a free mental health course and a vast array of publications on inclusion. The International Training Center of the ILO also has a few resources where we can actually go on the course on disability at the workplace, specifically tailored to give simplified understanding on the concepts of disability at the workplace. We have the KBDN website, which is on screen, which is the businessandisability.or.ke, and it has a vast array of some of the resources that have been developed by FKE, the ILO, and the Global Business Disability Network, and some of our associates. Some of them include a self-assessment tool just to measure your company's performance on the 10 principles and highlight where you need to put in more interventions to become more confident in regard to the disability confidence arena. There's also some downloadable resources in regard to the government regulations that we had before, some of the bills, some of the international instruments and charter resources, still based on the 10 principles, and these include videos, publications, and presentations. So we also have the National Council for Persons with Disability, who recently launched a career portal, which is supported by the Learner Cheshire Disability that has skilled persons with disabilities from employment to apprenticeships, and this career portal is found at the FUZU platform on the ncpwd.fuzu.com, which is National Councils for Persons with Disabilities.fuzu.com. So some of the in-depth advice to employers and the available incentives on law for disability inclusion at the workplace are also within that particular portal, and support to persons with disabilities for the assessment and acquisition of the disability card and tax exemption certificates, also in collaboration with KRA, are available. Some of the associate resources that we have from our associates, or the associates that we work with, we have the Action Network for the Disabled of Kenya, that is ANDI. We heard from our colleague this morning when we started, and they have the sensitization and awareness creation on disability. They also do the job fairs and awards to disability inclusive employers. We have the CBM, which is also which provides a platform for a disability assessment, whereby both physical and digital, whereby it's both physical and digital through the Eye to Eye in Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa. So we can always provide those detailed documents that you may require just to know more. There's also the soft skills training for persons with disabilities, which is also one of the key trainings that's very important, especially in raising confidence for our members and also for those with the disabilities, and even for us who are interactive or who are also inclusive at the workplaces. So there's also staff sensitization in disability by the CBM, and also in-depth and gender-sensitive training for employers on disability. We also have the Light for the World. It's a business initiative to support entrepreneurs with disabilities across the value chain within the country. And this is through the creation of supplier linkages between companies and entrepreneurs with disabilities. Site Savers, we heard from them this morning as well, who have an employer toolkit on building disability confident employers, with also the unconscious bias training and tools of employment ready or near ready skilled persons with disabilities. The pools of employment ready skilled persons with disabilities or near ready. Okay, then we have the United Disabled Persons of Kenya. It is the Federation of Disabled Persons organizations in Kenya, and it supports to employers includes the linkage to disabled persons organizations nationwide for corporate social responsibility and other initiatives. Also integrating disability data into corporate reporting, sensitization and awareness creation on disability, disability assessments, both physical and digital, and also developing or reviewing company policies for disability inclusion. So I think we're done with some of the resources that we do have, and it's very important again, like my colleague Grace Kaume started at the beginning, she said about, I would like to repeat actually my colleague Grace's previous conclusion on inclusion of persons with disability, who ought to be a key agenda for all businesses, which is also at the core of the human rights, but it also makes business sense, and are also seen as the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that. So basically, you can see that there are a wide range of resources available. All these organizations are available, and they're saying they are willing to work with us. They are willing to walk the journey with us as employers to make our spaces, our places of work friendly for persons with disability, but as inclusive as possible. So if you require any of those services, you're free to reach out. We'll try also to put in their contacts in there. If you require some assessments, or you require the unconscious bias training, or any other service that has been indicated there as being provided by any of those partners, they'll be more than happy to walk the journey with you so that together we can achieve this objective. So without taking much more time, I'll briefly give a chance to Dorothy Mulei from Plan International. And Dorothy will briefly speak about the issue of violence and harassment in the workplace, because like we said earlier, all these things are connected, they're integrated, and just we need to find space for each and every one of them. So Dorothy can take the few minutes, then we get to the next session.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll be sharing my screen. You're able to see my screen?
Yes, it's coming up.
Okay.
So you have 10 minutes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me just, okay, thank you very much. So I'll briefly take you through violence and harassment at the workplace. And I don't know whether you're able now to see my screen.
Yes, just put it on presentation mode.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will be looking at violence and harassment at the workplace, and our objective briefly will be just to look at how disability, gender, and violence in the workplace intersect to make a person with disability more vulnerable to violence. So what is violence and harassment? I think we all know what violence is, but it's just good to refresh our memory. And violence is basically a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices. It could be threats, whereby they could be single occurrences or repeated that aim at, result, or are likely to result in physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm. So those are the consequences of the violence and the harassment we're talking about. So when we talk about disability, there are basically some factors that make persons with disability more vulnerable to violence. And we are going to briefly look at some of those factors. And factor number one would be stigma and discrimination. And we all know what stigma and discrimination is, but just again to refresh our memory, stigma is whereby you view someone else negatively. And discrimination is actually the act now of actually treating someone else negatively because of factors that make them distinguished from you. There could be factors to do with, there are many factors, could be race, ethnicity, disability, ability, or many other factors that we all know about. When we actually stigmatize and discriminate persons with disability at the workplace, it actually increases the level of vulnerability to violence. And this is because they will not be able to really take part and in activities that promote protection and social support or empowerment, or activities that could actually protect them from being exploited at the workplace or even in the society. So what this means is that at the workplace, we really need to deal with our own beliefs, our own stereotypes, our own attitudes towards persons with disabilities, so that we are as inclusive as we can get, because stigma and discrimination has a very negative effect on anyone, and it would definitely put someone down and make them completely vulnerable to abuse. Another thing that another factor that can increase the vulnerability to violence is the perceptions about the capacity of persons with disability. And this is, we have all seen in the media and all the other places of persons with disability being abused, but because they are not maybe able to, and the way people perceive their ability, you find that most of these cases do not actually end up getting justice, because you find most perpetrators of violence to persons with disabilities perceive these people as persons who are not, who will be, number one, unable to defend themselves, and two, unable to effectively report the incidents of violence. And this is particularly true to victims of, persons with mental illness, persons with severe forms of impairments. And because a perpetrator will think, this person will not be able to identify me, this person will not be believed at when they tell the story. So eventually the perceptions that we hold about persons with disability eventually lead to them being very vulnerable to abuse. Another factor that can increase the vulnerability of persons with disability is the environmental barriers and the lack of transportation. I think the previous speakers have spoken to accessibility, and one speaker actually talked about the fact that you have to go to 5th floor or 4th floor. And most of the time you realize that persons with disability, not all of them, but majority may require some support and assistance to move around the workplace, to move around in our communities and access different services. And sometimes you find that the person who is actually giving the assistance, maybe the one who is assisting this wheelchair user to get into a place or access services, is the person who is actually abusing or exploiting this person. So it then becomes very hard for this person who is being abused to be able to report, because they won't be able to do so in a confidential manner, because the person who is assisting them is the one who is actually abusing them. So I think environmental barriers are one of the factors that really predispose persons with disabilities to violence. And I think it should be, in our workplaces, we should be aware of that. And as we try to offer us, maybe if someone requires any assistance, you should not use your power. We always say there are different forms of power. You shouldn't use your power over this person to actually exploit or abuse them. Another factor that would predispose a person to violence is the lack of information and knowledge and skills. And this is particularly true to women and girls with disabilities, because most of the time they have very little information about gender-based violence and even about personal safety and what it means to be able to protect themselves. So we need to make sure, even at our workplaces, we are able to tell this out to our staff, that in case of any breach of policy, or you are harassed or abused, what are the reporting mechanisms? What is the feedback? How can you give feedback? How can you get help? And us, even now as a HR people or people in leadership, we need to be really cognizant of this fact that women will be most women, not even women generally, and now a woman with disability will be more likely to get abused. So we need to be really have our eyes open and our ears also wide open in case we are able, so that we're able to recognize any case of abuse, even if it's not reported. Another thing that will predispose a person with disability to violence is isolation and a lack of community support. And most of the time you find that women with disabilities are more risky, have more risk to violence, and particularly inside the home. The convention, the ILO Convention C190 that of 2019, I think, has actually acknowledged that domestic violence is one of the key barriers that prevents productivity at the workplace. And so I think even as in the workplace, we need to be really aware that domestic violence actually affects productivity. And we need to be able to also recognize and a person who may be going through other challenges at home. And in case maybe as a HR personnel or the leadership, you come across such a case of a person undergoing domestic violence, then you should be able to have mechanisms that are clearly stipulated on how you can be able to really help this person to deal with what is happening at home, so that also it doesn't affect their work. So I think these are some of the factors, to mention but a few, that may actually really affect persons with disability at our workplace and make them more vulnerable to violence. So then we ask ourselves, what are the laws and policies that are out there that actually prevent violence and harassment in the workplace? And I think the previous speakers have spoken about this, the many laws that we have. Number one, we have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is CEDA, and Kenya actually acceded to this in 1984. And Article 11A, we have the right to work as an inalienable right of all human beings. And we also have F, the right to protection of health and to safety in working conditions. So I think that is one of our major, when it comes to gender inclusion and empowering women and making sure that women have a platform and opportunity to really be able to participate in the society. This is one of our policies that really guides us. And then we also have the ILO Convention number 190, and which has really spoken a lot and is really specific on workplace harassment. And it has given so many recommendations on what should be done and in case of any. And I hope that many countries will be able to ratify this in their own countries. So we have also the Disability Act of 2003, we have the Constitution of Kenya, we have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 27 to be precise, which talks about work and employment. And it actually stipulates a lot of rights that persons with disabilities have to make sure that they work in an environment that is free from violence, that is safe, and that their needs are met. So we just briefly on the ILO Convention, some of the core principles is that there is need for respect and to promote and the realization of the right of everyone at the world of work, free from violence and harassment. And we also, the convention actually recognizes that acknowledges that gender-based violence and harassment disproportionately affects women and girls. And therefore, to be able to deal with these issues of gender-based violence at the workplace, we also need to have or take up an approach of gender-responsive approach. And a gender-responsive approach is whereby we're trying to really look now with a gender lens, trying to look at the different needs that women and women with disabilities may actually have at the workplace, and also other factors that may really predispose them to violence, and then really trying to see and coming up with mechanisms that can really address that to make sure that everyone is safe at the workplace. And also the convention also recognizes the different and complementary roles and functions of governments, employers. In short, what this means is that it's a collaborative effort. We all have to come together to make sure we end violence at the workplace. And then, of course, we recognize, including for women workers, as well as vulnerable groups or groups in situation of vulnerability. So we need to recognize, even at the workplace, who is most likely to be marginalized at our workplace and make sure that we are protecting these groups. So what is our role? Forum is basically for the HR. What would be our role? I've just stated a few here, but I'm sure there are very many other different things that is free from violence. Number one, we need to be able to recognize different forms of violence. Brief, I've not been able to really go deep into looking at the different forms of violence. I think it's because of time, but we need to really be able to recognize this. And I'll give an example. I once worked in an organization where I clearly, once I joined, I could clearly see a lot of harassment, a lot of sexual harassment, and people just seemed okay with it. So I think as the HR personnel or the leadership, we really need to be able to recognize would be violence on each level's role in preventing bad behavior in the workplace. It is not the role of the HR alone or the work of the leadership. All staff really need to come in and make sure that they are preventing violence at the workplace. Number three, and almost the last one, is to ensure that we appropriately address all bad behavior, including habit and feedback mechanism. So when while addressing it, you don't actions you create that cases. And while addressing it, you further make this victim of violence to be more victimized. So you have to make sure that you are really using a proper mechanism to solve and deal with any bad behavior at the workplace. Another thing is that we need to ensure that policies are elaborate and clearly spell out what is considered as harassment and also what is considered as violence. I think I talked about that previously. And the last one is we need to constantly monitor the application of policies and to make progress or lack of progress visible. So someone else talked about and said that it's not just having policies, we need to make sure that these policies are being implemented and are being followed. And in case you notice that these policies are not being followed or they need to be amended, then I think it is your right and responsibility to be able to say out loud so that that can be done. So finally, in conclusion, work tends to produce the cause of inequalities in which they're operating, and this is basically due to the social norm and the dynamics that we ascribe to. And we are also all work towards a gender responsive and gender transformative workplace. And when we talk about a gender transformative workplace, is a workplace that really challenges those gender norms and stereotypes, really make some people more vulnerable to violence. And then the last one is we need to be able to recognize and prevent and respond to different forms of violence at the workplace. Thank you very much.
For that presentation, indeed quite a lot packed in it. We hope we can be able to share, some of the content with our members, but I believe also they have been able to follow and get really the what to do and what not to do in matters violence and harassment at the workplace. So without, again, taking much more time, at least we're doing well in terms of our program, we'd like to just look at a few questions that probably require responses at this point, and I'd like to invite my colleague Mary once again to take us through that section so we see what we can be able to address and what can be addressed later. Mary?
Good afternoon. Okay, a few minutes
to good afternoon, but nevertheless, almost good afternoon. So addressing some of the questions that have been asked by our virtual participants. One of the questions, and I think this one comes down to us here. Peter Maneki is asking, what is the process of the employer benefiting with the mentioned incentives? Okay. So we put it down on the floor, or we can also invite our participants to raise up their hands to answer the question, should you feel like you want to participate in it? Yeah.
Fine, we can address that. I can invite Ngao to address that particular question.
Thank you, Grace. So one most important thing is, as per the Disability Act, employers should know, if even you employ a person with disability and does not have a disability card, then technically that person is not entitled to the benefits as a person with disability in Kenya. So first things first, for you as an employer who has employed a person with disability, you have to ensure that person has a disability card, which actually, as we say, is issued by the National Council of Persons with Disability. So once you've employed that person, then definitely the person with disability himself is entitled to the benefits of the tax exemption. But you, as an employer, in case you have done any kind of accommodations, then you can follow up with the evidence that you employed a person with disability for the disability card. You can do a follow-up with the National Council for Persons with Disability, and from there you'll be actually be given the direction and the process of how actually you can get your benefits. Thank you. Over.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ngao, for that elaborate answer. We'll go to Wambua John, who's asking, from our employer's perspective, what approaches do you think they are helpful when disability persons organizations and other CSO engage employers on issues on employment for persons with disabilities? What tips would you give DPOs, CSOs as they engage employers on this issue? Can I bring it down to you, Grace?
Yes, and I think this question has been the course of the conversations, really, from the discussions we had with the various employers, because I think we've talked about first issues of partnerships, issues of employers just appreciating the needs of the persons with disabilities. But I think key for me is really just establishing what partnerships work, where do you get what kind of information, what kind of help do you exactly need, because that way then we'll be able to grow together. We cannot, no one knows it all. It's a space where everyone is still trying to grow. You find sometimes DPOs or some of the CSOs want to do something but probably are lacking in resources or are lacking in certain information. But that information or those kind of resources probably are available with a different partner or entity. So some of the tips we'd give to the DPOs and CSOs is, yes, have the right intent, have the purpose, reach out to networks, reach out to partnerships, and progressively grow in the mission that you've set.
Can I add something, Grace?
Yes, you can.
So the other thing also would be that we heard clearly from Simon that employers are intentionally willing to employ PWDs on their workplace. And PWDs, on the other hand, are also looking for employment, but they don't know exactly where to. So once there's this collaboration of DPOs and CSOs and employers, then it's easy to target persons with disabilities to, give them employment as intended by the employers who are willing to employ already.
Thank you, Lois, for that addition to Grace's response. We'll go again back to John Wambua, who's saying that we need disability training guidelines, mostly on the rights of persons with disabilities, especially on CRPD Article 27 on work and employment in workplace, which could be fused or used alongside the general HR manuals to address issues of accessibility, reasonable accommodation, opportunities, and such. Maybe just to give a start to that particular question that has been asked, we had a few resources that we say we would definitely share with you, and some of the resources actually our associates do have. So I think I'll take these questions out to our members here in the panel, who can be able to answer this question. Can I take it down to you people? Stephen?
Let me just say that we appreciate what the suggestions from Wambua. And under KBDN, these are the things that we are dealing with. And that's why we are encouraging the employers to come into the network so that then we are able to work on the guidelines, we're able to understand the issues they have, and then work together for that. So this is really noted.
Okay. So John, on what you've had, we are working with all our employers in this particular network as well, so that we can come together and be able to give something concrete, so give something that we can all move ahead forward so that we can be able to be as inclusive as possible. How can I get assisted to obtain artificial name? Okay, fine. I have on several occasions. Why should PWDs with permanent disability keep on renewing the tax exemption? Mr. Ngao, can you probably answer that question on permanent disability? And also somebody who's asking about obtaining an artificial limb, you might be having areas that we can be able to assist them with.
Yes, so the question from Richard, definitely, if you want to obtain artificial limb, definitely you can approach the National Council for Persons with Disability. They have actually assistive device program, and I'm sure they will help you to the best of their level. Now, when we come about issue about disability and the renewing of the tax exemption, we understand also seriously that disability is not always permanent. Sometimes it could be temporary. So maybe at that time you acquire the certificate, you are actually having a sort of disability, but actually because it was temporary, after a couple of years, you are okay. So definitely you won't need that exemption. But we are still also having a big debate for some types of disability which are permanent. And definitely, yes, we are doing some lot of lobby so that at least we have a change for those who have permanent disabilities. At least the issue of tax, renewing the tax exemption is long term. So this is a discussion which is ongoing. But definitely, we have to understand disability is not always permanent. Sometimes it is temporary. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'd raise the same question again in regards to there's somebody who had asked about prosthetic eyes in Kenya. Should we also refer back to the National Council of People with Disabilities?
Yes, but definitely there's a percentage which the National Council can offer, because definitely it's very expensive. They're very, very expensive. And then definitely what the person will be able to really raise, which is the other amount which the person's disability or maybe the National Council won't be able to raise. But in every year, there's actually an assistance up to the maximum of 100,000.
Okay. Any other questions somebody might want to raise on the raising your hand up so that we can answer? I think we have answered the ones that are on the chat. So is there anybody who would want to? Okay. Anybody from the participants who would like to ask a question and raise their hand? Okay, we have Scovia or Oma. You can ask a question. Scovia. Okay.
Sorry, that was in error. Sorry, that was in error.
That's okay, Scovia. Thank you. Any other question? Any other hand raised up that we can allow you to ask a question? Okay, John Wambua, again, we can hear from you.
Yeah, hello guys, and thanks a lot for the forum. It's an eye opener. Now, my question is, I was wondering whether in our country, in either in law or any policy or any guideline, do we have anywhere where we have mandates for the employers to be trained on the rights of persons with a disability, including work and employment? Do we have such a law that mandates employers to be trained on the rights of persons with a disability, especially on work and employment? I'm saying this because in CRPD Article 27 on work and employment, we have a section where we are looking whether the government has put in place mandate for employers to be trained on work and employment. So I was wondering, in our Kenyan context, in our legal framework, do we have such a law or a policy or a guideline? And if we don't, would it be beneficial for work and for disability inclusive work? Thank you.
Okay, I think we're also guided by the acts of people with disabilities of 2003 that could actually give us a start point. But I think I'll ask Mr. Ngao to just take up this question so that he can take us forward with what you're asking.
Thanks a lot, Mr. John, for that concern. And particularly in Kenya, right now, through the National Council for Persons with Disability, every company in the country, it must have what's called Disability Data Index. For example, when it comes to tendering, the National Council for Persons with Disability, it has the right to ensure to know, like, every company, how many tenders are given to persons with disability. There is a quota on AGPO. But also to elaborate that, it is within the mandate of the National Council for Persons with Disability to ensure what we call disability mainstreaming. And it is the body which is actually entitled to reach out to companies to train and to sensitize on issues to do with disability mainstreaming. So we have actually a body, a state agency, which is actually formulated by the laws of Kenya to ensure that is done. So true, it is there. It's a body which is supposed to do all issues about disability mainstreaming, including the training, including getting data index, like how many persons with disability have been given every city in terms of even the employment quota. So within that aspect of disability mainstreaming, it's supposed also to highlight even on the Article 27 of the CRPD and other issues to do with persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I don't see any other questions raised. Any comments? Otherwise, we'll hand it over to Stephen to take us through the last bit of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Grace, and the panelists, the delegates. I think we can just offer appreciation to our moderators, the panelists, and the good work they have done. And we just do it virtually. Thank you. Mine is to thank again the delegates for taking your time to participate in these very important forums. We will continue having these engagements on the inclusion agenda because, as I said, the Federation of Kenya Employers is very keen to see to it that workplaces are accessible for and employment is accessible for persons with disability. We have the FKE Kenya Business and Disability Network, which is meant to help us as the employers, as the owners of companies, workplaces, to mainstream the issues of inclusion at our workplace. And I want to encourage all of us who have attended this forum to join. You can Google business and disability and then join the network. There is a form there how to become a member. Join the network so that then we can, through that, build your capacity. The aim of this network is to build your capacity as an employer to address the issues of disability at workplace. We'll be able to even attend to issues like what John was raising on getting the relevant people and understanding the gaps you have and being able then to put in place different modules that are going to build your capacity. We'll also be able to help you if you need an audit at your workplace to understand what are the issues you need to address so that then you can make your workplace to be more accommodative, whether you're looking at the policies or you're looking at the physical space or you're looking at the interactions, the relationships that are there. I've come to understand from the discussions we have had that there are very important things. Purpose, making inclusion agenda part and parcel of your business model. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's a human rights thing, and it makes a business sense. And so we should be encouraged to do it and ensure that we mainstream it in our business. The other thing that has come out strongly is on building confidence, and building confidence on both building confidence from the employers. The employers, from what we saw from the data from site servers, they're saying they've observed employers are willing and ready and they want to employ persons with disability, but they don't know how to deal with some of the issues that they need to deal with. And so the Kenya Business and Disability Network that FKA has put in place is meant to help you build that confidence, understand how to deal with these issues. And so we welcome you to join. And then also the other thing that came out is to build the confidence of the persons with disability themselves, give them the right kind of skills, give them the opportunity, give them the platforms where they can access. And that's why we need this conversation to continue and to look at all the avenues, all the policies, all the initiatives that can be done to ensure that our members, starting from Safaricom and to the micro level employer, all of them are come on board in ensuring that we mainstream these issues of inclusion and employment of persons with disability. Then the other key thing that came out was about culture. The culture we built at workplace, the culture we built in our relationship, let it be a culture that promotes inclusion, let it be a culture that promotes diversity. And lastly, on our engagement, and I was even a question about engagement that was asking how do you engage the employer? Engage the employer from an open side where you also need to understand him as the employer is also understanding you. And with that, I think we've done we've had a great forum. I know that the participants have learned a lot, the delegates, and as the Federation will continue, as I said, to promote the issues of inclusion at workplace with our partners. I want to thank them once again to ensure that we as Kenya, as we have the good laws and we have the political goodwill and all the people, as we have understood, we remain a leader in ensuring that our people, we accord them the support they need. And with that, I want, on behalf of the Executive Director of the Federation of Kenya Employers, Madam Jacqueline Mungo, to officially close this meeting. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Yetu, sauti ya waajiri wetu, tunasherehekea uhusiano wetu. Shirikisho yetu, sauti ya waajiri wetu, tunasherehekea uhusiano wetu. Shirikisho yetu, sauti ya waajiri wetu, tunasema asante waajiri, asante wanachama, asante washirika, asante, tunasema asante waajiri, asante wanachama, asante washirika, asante. Miaka za upendo za maendeleo, shirika la wafanyikazi wetu. Tunafurahia miaka za upendo za maendeleo, shirika la wafanyikazi wetu. Tunafurahia miaka za upendo